of all, my name is Curran, and I'm from the University of Newcastle. Right here, another one of those people who happens to be very fond of King Edward Park. And the last time I was involved with an event here, and the Heritage Committee, the National Trust Week, and there was a wonderful array of speakers giving us insights into the heritage of Newcastle from the point of view of engineering through to the health. And an incredibly educational evening for all of us on that particular night. So I expect this to be the same. This is where we're here to learn about something about King Edward Park, something about the issues, something about what's happening, and what is being done, and what needs to be done. We also just had an apology from Jay Quinlan, who was going to give us a welcome to the country. So in the absence of Jay, I would like to pay tribute to the ancestors, the guardians of the Obelisk tribe, to those who are the guardians of this place, and to think upon connection that we would like to have with the spirits of the Obelisk and the place that we're talking about tonight. So with your permission, we'll go ahead with the rest of the talk. And I'm now going to introduce Dr. John Lewer, and I should point out that I'm going to try and be one of those chairs that is as silent as possible. But we're not going to have long biographies and CVs and tell all the story of all the wonderful things that everybody's done. We're here with a mission, hear the words of those who are going to help us learn the story. So can you hear me all right? Is that okay? Right, thank you. So, can I introduce Dr. John Lewer and the Friends of King Edward Park to start the evening.
I'm on the executive of the Friends of King Edward Park. Just a little bit about my background. I'm an academic at the University of Newcastle. I'm in the Business and Law School. I'm actually a Novocastrian. I was born in this fair city. And for my sins, my doctoral thesis was on the closure of the steelworks. And my wife sat through me writing 130,000 words plus about the steelworks. So I have an affection for this great city. I had a hand in putting this meeting together with other members of the executive and the Hunter Regional Committee of the National Trust. I think, as Bernie pointed out, the purpose of this meeting is to bring together a range of speakers to celebrate the wonderful cultural heritage, other heritages as well, of King Edward Park. I'm really looking forward to hearing them. That's going to be terrific. As well as that, we've also got speakers that will be speaking to the issue about the heritage status of King Edward Park. I need to just speak briefly about the Friends of King Edward Park. We've distributed some membership forms, and it'd be lovely if some of you could be persuaded to join the fold later today. The Friends was established, it's an incorporated association. It was established about maybe a year or so ago. And it has in the order of something like 200 members. I won't take you through the detail, but if you go off to the Friends of King Edward Park website, you can see the various objectives that we've adopted. And they're largely about promoting and protecting the historic values of that wonderful space that is King Edward Park. I needed to point out to you that one of the successes, or part of the successes of the Friends of King Edward Park, apart from running a number of fundraising activities, we've been engaged in some litigation in the Land and Environment Court over a development application for the headland. Now, when we set this meeting up, I was quite at pains to discuss or tell my colleagues that it's not our intention to, traverse the whole the development application this evening, the litigation itself before the Land and Environment Court. I think that's probably better in another place. Tonight's about celebrating the incredible values of King Edward Park and looking to some further actions, such as supporting its registration on the State Heritage listing, which remarkably it doesn't have. I need to point out to you that you hopefully, ideally, that's been distributed in front of you. There's a there's a motion which goes to two issues. One is that recognising the heritage value of the park and its environs, that we do later this evening, we pass that resolution. The other is that there's a resolution, as you know, the headland has a rather ugly fence around it at the moment, which prohibits us getting access to public land. And ideally we might pass that resolution as well, asking that all action be taken to take that iron curtain away. I thought I should just spend a moment or two reflecting on some key aspects of what's happened, just to update you. And I'm summarising this to its essence. There was a development application which was approved for the headland, which you'd all be familiar with. The Friends of King Edward Park took litigation about that, and there was an initial threshold case. The council sought security of costs. If in fact we were to not succeed in that matter, costs could be awarded against us, which if anyone knows anything about the law, you know that they're probably not insignificant. And in fact, the council, I think, sought security of not less than $76,000 in costs. Now, we're just a poor little group of people. Certainly, we weren't in a situation of being able to raise those sorts of funds to extend the action. Anyway, under the relevant legislation, etc., it's available for a member of the court to determine that on public interest grounds, the matter should still go ahead, irregardless of the, let's say, the inability of the applicant to pay all costs. So that's essentially the scenario. We went to the Land and the Environment Court, and we put again I'm summarising, we put the case that it should be heard in the public interest, irregardless of the issue of costs. Now, I said I was from the Faculty of Business and Law, but I don't hold out to have any legal expertise whatsoever. Although I did go off and have a look at the preparation for this evening. I read it before as well. The actual judgment by, I think it's Biscoe J, Justice Biscoe in the Land and the Environment Court, and it's quite an interesting read. Essentially, Biscoe found in our favour, and the case will proceed. I was going to say this like a lawyer. I'm informed that that might take place later in the year, maybe in November. But there was just one part of Biscoe's judgment that I wanted to take you to, because I think it says a lot about the work of the people in the Friends of King Edward Park and others, and the incredible number of people we've got here this evening. That's really wonderful. So anyway, in the judgment, His Honour had to go to the issue of whether it was in the public interest for this matter to be heard about our headland. And he said, I'm satisfied that the proceedings, and this is in summary, I'm satisfied that the proceedings have been brought in the public interest, having regard to the following. That was the test that needed to be satisfied. The applicant is seeking to enforce public law obligations on part of the council and the minister. The proceedings relate in part to the protection of heritage items, including Aboriginal heritage items. And the proceedings have been brought to preserve the reserve for its dedicated purpose of public recreation and to preserve the park, which is a public park. The applicant's members are geographically widely spread. I'm sort of conscious of the NIMBY argument there. The applicant's members are geographically widely spread and not just limited to those in the immediate vicinity of the development proposal. None of the members of the applicant has any pecuniary interest in the outcomes of the proceedings. Now, I think that, for me, well summarises in part what the case is about, but more so, I think, in the broader context about why we're all here this evening in terms of the incredible values of King Edward Park. Just a couple more things. In our case, we're very privileged that senior counsels representing the Friends of King Edward Park, and that's Tim Robertson, who, interestingly enough, is the brother, I'm told, of Geoffrey Robertson.
Hey.
And also the University of Newcastle Legal Centre, Jackie Simpson and Felicity Wardell. They've been the solicitors that have been instructing the barristers. Now, the last thing to say is I just wanted to tell you a personal anecdote. as I said earlier, I was born in Newcastle, it's where my parents lived. Now, my dear parents are still alive. My mother will be 89 this year, and my dear father will be 92. Now, they met in Newcastle. He was in the Royal Australian Navy and was sent to Newcastle to defend us against the Japanese Imperial Navy. I think he said in a rowboat with a 303 at the front. I think that was anyway, he met my mother here in Newcastle, and I said to them recently about, look, they became friends of King Edward Park, and they're the oldest members of the association. That took pressure off, I know, a couple of other people. And in talking about the friends of King Edward Park, they sort of, my father looked at my mother with a sort of a knowing look. I think they probably did a little bit of their wooing, as they would have said in King Edward Park. And I think that's a useful anecdote in that I think for all of us, this place has got some incredible power. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the speakers tonight demonstrate that. So thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And hands up all those who have been wooed. I'm going to introduce Anne Hardy, the board member of the National Trust of Australia. Thanks, Anne.
The National Trust has been involved with heritage in Newcastle for quite a number of decades. Unfortunately, it's often hard to keep on the front foot with a lot of issues that come up in Newcastle. King Edward Park is an example of a heritage item that should have probably been on the State Heritage Register a number of years ago, but unfortunately it's slipped through the cracks like a lot of other sites in Newcastle. But when we met with friends of King Edward Park, we decided to form a working group that's part of the Coal River Working Party at the university, so we could have some people that have background. There was Dr. Robert Evans. He's put a lot of information together about Alfred Sharp, the landscape architect. So we found having a group of passionate people, and I think you have to have a lot of the knowledge that comes locally when we're looking at sites like this, that often consultants might come up from Sydney or elsewhere, but unless you've got those local contacts, people that you know you can get the stories from, where to find things in the archives, I think it's crucial to have that local base. So looking at the status of the heritage status of King Edward Park, I think generally a lot of heritage plans in Newcastle have got a focus of the built environment. There's the CBD heritage plan that was done back in the 90s. There hasn't been a comprehensive plan that looks at the landscape, or I think particularly the parks. King Edward Park, the James Fletcher Hospital was another site. So it seemed to stop, a lot of the plans stopped at Church Street, which meant, these other areas that are quite significant that don't relate to the built heritage are still really important. And I think that shift and focus of cultural heritage is slowly changing. So, we can look at more environmental issues, that it's not, the focus is around the built heritage, but how we use open space. Now, it was on the Register of the National Estate in 1980, and what's happened with that register is that in the early 2000s, the Commonwealth Government changed the whole process of listing. It was like wiping the slate clean, so everything that's been on that register, February this year, is all like null and void, so you can't use that, even if you're trying to seek Commonwealth listing. So a lot of the hard work that's done by Keith Parsons, Joyce Bond, getting a lot of these places listed, it's then starting off a whole new process. So unfortunately, it didn't have any recognition nationally. It's in the Hill Conservation Area, which is important for cities to have those conservation areas in their towns, but it still doesn't give adequate protection. When something like this comes up, a proposal at this scale, there wasn't a lot of the heritage policies implemented that could have it looked at as a whole. So the Bogey Hole and the Defence Works, they were two areas that were on the State Heritage Register. The nomination was put to the Heritage Council in 2008. So that's where the council commissioned to have a lot of these heritage sites in Newcastle reviewed to see, what did come up to state listing, what, may need to go on the State Heritage Register. Now, at that time, when it went to the council, the comments that came back, they didn't reject it. So the nomination that went in for King Edward Park, they said the nomination did not argue the totality of the park's significance. More clarity was required to what makes up King Edward Park Group. While potentially of state heritage significance, the nomination does not prove the case. So they were after a more intense nomination that looked at the totality of the park. So with all that mixed history, with the Defence Works, incorporating, links from the Bogey Hole over to Ordnance Street. So they asked for it to be redone and to come back to them. And unfortunately that didn't happen. So that's like 4 years have passed when potentially we could have had a nomination up before now. So that's where the delays come from there. Like I said, the group submitted the nomination only 6 weeks ago. So that will be actually put on hold until after the Land and Environment Court hearing. We've named the nomination the Newcastle Recreation Reserve because that really captures what the reserve, what the parkland is about. It was only named King Edward Park from 1910, as you see, but it's had all these other names given to it over its time. But it was really proposed for recreational use back in the 1830s and 40s. It's mentioned on plans. So we've just developed a name that tries to capture the whole use of the site. And just to have a look at the curtilage that we've put to the Heritage Council, it's the government domain, which is where the James Fletcher site is. That was put on the State Heritage Register in 2010. Again, it's looking at a landscape rather than individual buildings. So we thought this is a neat fit because this area has got such a strong history related to government use. It is related to the James Fletcher site. So even though it's chopped up and the roads have been put in, it does relate because of the coal mines, because of the commandant using the baths, living in Government House, which was on Watt Street. And it was also important to put Urinulli, which is the cliff running along Newcastle South Beach, and the significant story related to that from Reverend Threlkeld and his discussion with Birraban. So you can see where the curtilage is. It takes in the entire park and the Obelisk and Arcadia Park as well. And we talked about, what comparisons there were in New South Wales or even Australia that we could look at another park that had similar features, and there really isn't another park. There's no other park with a convict-built recreational bars. It's got a very mixed heritage, as most people probably know if they've lived in Newcastle for quite a while. That convict coal mine is quite significant as well. It was one of the last government coal mines in the colony, so it was leased to the A Company for a short time, but it's very significant that it relates to the coal shafts on the James Fletcher Hospital site. This one's a later one, but just a quick plan. That's from the 1820s, and it shows that black spot just up over the boundary.
Use the pointer.
Yeah, so just there. So it's got labelled Old Coal Pit. So that's the one up on the bowling club site that we know today, but you can see how the town was quite planned, and that's all open space all up around there. Government House, so the commandant would have wandered around there to the Bogey Hole. The native grasses, I've just come to realise before we put the nomination in that the state government's come out with a regulation now that if there's any native grasses, they are to be nurtured, that it can't be mowed. So King Edward Park might at times look quite unmowed, but it's what they actually found a lot of the thermida grass, and it's like a burnt reddish colour. So they're trying to just nurture that and have that sort of reintroduced to reflect, you know, the old or the native grass that's been there. And if anyone's interested, the council does have a pamphlet online. Yeah. But I'll put that artwork up there just so you can see from 1820 that native grass and that little burnt look. That it was very open. There weren't a lot of trees, but the importance of it is that this area, King Edward Park, the Obelisk would be over here, but how it all relates into this, like down the hill as well, to where Government House was. And if you look close, which I don't think you can see it here, but this is actually enlarged as a panorama out the front of the Maritime Centre, and it does show the coal shaft. Just can't see it from here, but there is like a small fence around it. So there's a lot in the artworks you can actually see. But just quickly, because of the significance of the park, we believe that it has national heritage significance. So we've also submitted earlier this year a national nomination to have the two significant government precincts in Newcastle. So the Colwith precinct that have the coal mines around Fort Scratchley and the early work at the convicts, and also the government domain, because all this land west of King Edward Park was AAC land. That remained as government land. So we put that submission in, and they only look at submissions every year. We can only put the submission in every 2 years. So it's been knocked back, but we're hoping that they'll relook at it in January and it may be considered for national heritage listing. So I guess from here, because the state heritage nomination is really at a standstill until we find out what happens in the Land and Environment Court, the process will be there'll be public exhibition. People can look at it. We're hoping that the Heritage Council does accept the precinct that we've nominated, and you know, to have the obelisk in, to have that Arcadia Park, to have the whole landscape in, not just to have certain sections of the park. You have to have that whole landscape. So there will be time for people to comment on the nomination. So I think it's important to probably keep an eye on the Friends of King Edward Park website as for when it's available, and to make a comment. Whether or not an interim heritage order may be something that's needed if the outcome isn't favourable to the heritage of the park. That's something that I think the National Trust will probably discuss, and other heritage groups might also be interested in, you know, sort of looking down that avenue to have the park looked at over a 12-month period so that its heritage is assessed. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.